Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, we were just recording the other day. What the hell?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Weird.
Yeah, as it turns out, the Vikings decided to make a major move in the way of a trade and release the information about it early on a Sunday morning when you were having internet problems. Is this the sort of thing that just sort of happens? Like your internet gets like spidey sense that something major is about to happen for the Vikings, and so it goes down briefly?
Yeah, now that I take fewer naps, that's when Vikings news breaks. Because remember when all the Vikings news broke when I was taking naps, just like 2-hour naps?
Yep.
And it was like, oh, Adrian Peterson's been arrested. And I was like, oh, that's good to wake up to.
Like, oh, well, we got another Dewey to worry about. Great.
Yeah.
More overnight stuff.
Yeah. It feels like the Vikings either have like really explosive news or no news at all. There's no like the closest we got to like mid-level news was when they signed Michael Pierce. Like, great. Okay. But like super quiet off season. There were rumors that they might trade Anthony Harris. There were rumors they might trade Kyle Rudolph, whatever, right? But they didn't do anything all offseason, and it felt like the biggest thing that they would do, aside from signing Michael Pierce, was like to lock down Everson Griffin for another year. And then, of course, this happens.
Yeah, it is. It is certainly something, and this is the trade for Yannick Ngakoue. We will be talking a lot about this throughout this bonus episode of Norse Code. Just a special note to our Patreon subscribers: no bonus episode this week outside of this, just because this is pretty major news. So we'll be going over a lot of this here in just a moment. But before we do, just want to thank you guys so much for listening, for sharing information about Norse Code to others, whether you're doing it on social media or if you're doing it Jehovah's Witness style and knocking on doors, which, if memory serves, you had a Jehovah's Witness at one point say that they listened to Norse Code, so that sort of thing. So
thanks, man.
Appreciate it. So again, if you enjoy the show, please feel free to donate in one of two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode as well and listen to all of the bonus episodes that we have been providing. Obviously, we're not doing one this episode, but normally we put out a bonus episode with just about every episode. So if you need more Arif and James, please feel free to donate to the show. We do have 2 donations to speak of real quick. We have a special PayPal donation from Ayush. I'm gonna hopefully say that's I'm gonna hopefully just bet that's okay, from Ayush, for what was listed as not quite Tree Fitty, but was basically $3.50 times 12. So as a note, if you are willing to put in a PayPal donation for $42, this in case this was like $41.99, if you are willing to put in a donation for that, I would be happy to send you a folder or a link to a folder that the Patreon episodes are going to be put into, because that's a year's worth of Patreon in one shot. We can't argue against that. We want to make sure that this is like the PayPal stuff is also included in accessing bonus materials. You just won't be able to access it through the same ways that the Patreon people can, through their app or through the link in their podcast streams. But if you do donate $42 to Norse Code, you get a year's worth of bonus episodes just to you. So again, if you're interested in that, you can go do that. Thank you so much, Ayush. Really do appreciate that. I will hit you up later to provide you with that link. Also, a new Patreon subscriber, Jay Hendricks, who says, quote, "I'm happy to finally not be lazy and subscribe. I listen to all your podcasts and crave more. You guys are the best. I'm a Vikings fan from the northern Chicagoland area, and I found that a specific coach of the Bears shops at my store. For privacy, I won't say who, but his name rhymes with Saggy. He asked if I was a Bears fan, and I proudly said, no, I'm a Vikings fan. He said, awesome, they were my favorite team growing up. My head proceeded to think, damn you, don't make me like you. If you could ask him anything, what would you ask?"
I mean, if I could ask him anything and get an honest answer, it would be, what he thinks about Mitch Trubisky and whether or not he thinks he genuinely has a weakness throwing outside the numbers to his left.
Well, if anything, you're on brand.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, so it would be fascinating, right? Like, if he had a mechanical answer to this, if he was just like, no, I mean, he doesn't open his hips enough or something, right? I'd be like, oh my gosh, it's real. Which, I mean, but
all you're really looking for is just some sort of thing where not only are the voices in your head real, but they're accurate. Like, you're just looking for that moment of assuredness.
Yeah. That's important, especially because I saw a recent thread that kind of shook my
which we will cover.
Not that. I'm talking about the question about how we define Avril Lavigne.
That, yes.
that one was tough for me to process.
Listen, there's just a lot of questions about whether or not Avril Lavigne is alive or not, and whether or not Avril Lavigne exists in the same way that the Doctor from Doctor Who exists, and that the character lives on, but the person can pass and go away.
I've long come to accept that the original body, the original human that we called Avril Lavigne, passed away. But whether or not we should accept the new person, Melissa, as Avril Lavigne and treat them as if they were Avril Lavigne, knowing the totality of the fraud. I mean, it was a compelling argument. It's tough.
It truly is. For those of you who are unaware, we've been apparently doing this show for over 7 years, and this is one of my favorite longtime gags. So if you really want to go down a YouTube hole,
to our extended universe,
yes, it is part of our. This is canon. The death of Avril Lavigne is considered canon in the Norse Code extended universe. So go ahead and Google that and hate yourself later. So also, just before we begin on the Yannick news, this is your last chance for Fantasy Greatness. We will be closing up registration at midnight on Monday night. So if you want to get in, you need to do it now, because on early Tuesday morning, I'm going to be doing my drawings, and I will be moving the people around into the teams that are going to exist. So there's 4 teams that are going to be around, and we have nearly 200 people who've signed up. And that includes the Patreon people. So there's gonna be some broken hearts. I'm trying as best as we can to accommodate as many people into these leagues as we can, but this is such a dangerous concept, and you people hate yourselves so much that you want to pile onto it. So if you would like to get in on the Patreon, or if you'd like to get in on the fantasy league, now is your time. And if you do, email me at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com or DM the Norse Code DN account. Just make sure that your email address is listed so I can add it to my list. All right.
Yeah, we'll enable your self-abuse, but only so much.
Yes, this is all on you, buddy. All right, let's get right into the news. Yannick Ngakoue to the Vikings was announced early this morning. According to the Schefter tweet, the Jaguars agreed to trade franchise defensive end Yannick Ngakoue to Minnesota for a second and conditional 5th round pick that could go as high as a 3rd round pick. League sources tell ESPN. Ngakoue still has to sign his tender, but the trade is in place. Ngakoue is expected to be a Viking. Ngakoue is also expected to take less this year than he was going to be doing for the Jaguars.
Right, so he can only take a 1-year deal under the way that the franchise tag, once you offer the tender, the way that operates. And so the Vikings have apparently negotiated that 1-year deal. And I don't know if this means that the Jaguars take the balance, because what had happened with Jadeveon Clowney when he was traded to the Seahawks from the Houston Texans was that the Texans, as part of the terms of the trade, took on $7 million of the cap hit, and the Seahawks took the rest. But it sounds like this is just a different deal. He has to sign before he can be traded, right? Because he's not technically on a team, but he's exclusively, the Jaguars have rights to him. So he has to sign the franchise take tender and then renegotiate that contract. And he probably has to do it before he technically is traded to the Vikings. It's all very weird, but that's what happens. It sounds like his cap hit is around 13 some million. Now the Vikings only have 12.5 million in cap space. And so they're going to have to restructure some contracts in order to fully accommodate this trade. And in addition to that, they probably also want to maintain about $5 million in buffer space. That's traditionally what they've done. So, there's still some more moves to come. I would not be shocked with an Adam Thielen restructure, a Riley Reif restructure, a Harrison Smith restructure. Those are the big money contracts that you can either secure longer term with the restructure and reduce the cap early on, or like in the case of Riley Reif, essentially threaten to cut him, unless, which I don't think is going to happen. But they might be able to secure more favorable terms with Reif, where the Vikings have his replacement already in the roster, than with Harrison Smith, where they just moved a track athlete to safety. Like, that's how great they are at the position.
So this is quite the move. And the Vikings haven't exactly made a lot of trades this offseason for bigger names. And this is something that even when it was suggested about an episode or two ago, you had shot down as it seems too out of it seems a bit, I say outlandish, but it seems out of character. It seems like the sort of thing that the Vikings can't pay for. And this is quite the asset that would be lining up theoretically with Danielle Hunter and cause absolute havoc to NFC North offensive lines.
Well, I think that all of the offensive lines in the NFC North are in a real tough spot. Right? Because you've got Khalil Mack, you've got the Smith brothers. Evidently, even Rashawn Gary is looking quite good in camp. We'll see, but it kind of doesn't matter because they also have Kenny Clark. Trey Flowers for the Lions, I think, is still a really quality player. And so, one of the conditions of the Ngakoue trade for that 5th round pick is that it rises to a 4th round pick if he makes the Pro Bowl on the first ballot. And then it rises to a 3rd round pick if he does that, and then also the Vikings win the Super Bowl. So it's a 5th round pick. And the reason I'm pretty confident about that is A, it's the Vikings, but B, I don't know that he'll be one of the 2 best pass rushers in the division, much less the conference. And that I don't think is a knock on him. He is a high-level pass rusher, but it is just a wild division in terms of pass rushing. And so it's going to be pretty difficult to play tackle in the NFC North for any of these teams. And the fact that the Vikings have been able to maintain having 2 high-level pass rushers over the years and have gone to great lengths apparently to do so again, I think shows a commitment to that. It's going to be tough to stop this group.
So just looking at it at its face, the Vikings are used to the play of Everson Griffin over the past several years. If you were to kind of break down the differences between Everson Griffin and Ngakoue, what would be the things that stand out to you?
Well, I mean, in part because of Everson Griffin's age, Ngakoue has a better get off from the line of scrimmage, so he's pretty explosive. I don't think that he's going to beat Danielle Hunter off the snap, but it's very difficult to find someone who jumps the snap and turns that directly into speed better than him. Griffin has transitioned into becoming a speed to power rusher, and so he has a lot more power rushing in his arsenal now than he did back in, like, say, 2009. And so with Ngakoue, you see somebody who's much more comfortable kind of flattening the corner, bending the edge, and using speed as a huge asset. Whereas, we always knew Griffin had a ton of speed and a ton of athleticism. That was a big part of his game, but the flexibility that Ngakoue demonstrates in flattening the curve and making sure that they can get to the quarterback, that is kind of new. The flip side of that is that he's not as good in the power game as Everson Griffin is. They both have some power moves in their arsenal. They both have a bull rush. They both have a long arm. And Ngakoue's is good, but it certainly isn't as good as Everson Griffin's. And I think the difference is fairly notable. So that is something where, if you're up against a tackle that's a really great athlete, but it isn't necessarily all that strong. So, think like Brian O'Neill kind of guy. Ngakoue is going to have a little bit more trouble than Everson Griffin because Griffin can choose how he wants to attack that player. Whereas Ngakoue, he does have a bull rush, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult. That said, all of that together, that totality has turned into a higher pressure rate producing player and one who is more consistent, right? Because Everson Griffin fell off in the back half of the season, whereas Ngakoue has been pretty good about generating pressure. Now, if you take a look, I think it is PFF grades. There are just some spikes in the grades where, he just has like a 90 grade. And so he feels inconsistent, but he always has the ability to win off the tackle. And then whether or not he produces a pressure is more dependent on kind of the opposing quarterback. So from a pass rush perspective, that's one difference. The other difference is that Ngakoue is a much worse run defender. And if you take a look at his raw numbers, that doesn't look to be the case. He's got high tackle for loss numbers. He's got a really good run stop rate. And much better than Griffin's, honestly. But if you take a look from snap to snap to snap, what ends up happening is that Ngakoue misses a lot of tackles. He has like the 9th highest missed tackle rate among edge rushers in the run game, among 102 edge rushers. So he misses a lot of tackles at around 22.8% of his attempts. That's huge, whereas Griffin wasn't near that. And then also he gets washed out in the run game. So he either makes a play in the backfield or he gives up the lane. And he's been more of a liability than an asset. So for every stop or tackle for loss that he generates, he gets pushed out or washed out of the run, on 2 or 3 different snaps. So that is not something that you saw with Griffin, whose effectiveness in the run game had dropped off over the past couple of years, but he was always able to kind of set the edge and force runners to change their lane. Whereas Ngakoue, that's not really in a skill set, which is kind of interesting, right? Because the Vikings have always prioritized that. All of their pass rushers have been really good against the run going all the way back. Jared Allen, obviously, his knock was that he wasn't great against the run, but in his peak years, he was a really high-level run defender too. And then obviously under Zimmer, that's kind of a requirement. And so to get somebody who's not that is, I think, kind of meaningful. And that's another big difference from Griffin. So I think you ended up with an upgrade, but there are certainly strengths and weaknesses of theirs that are different from each other.
So I was reading the article on The Athletic about just like how this trade ended up getting done, and this seemed like a direct result of Everson Griffin signing with Dallas, correct?
Yeah, certainly. Apparently, the Vikings had offered a somewhat similar deal to Everson Griffin as Dallas offered. Some details, I guess, might have been a little bit different. Maybe Griffin just kind of wanted to feel a little bit more respected, and so he went somewhere else. But for the most part, the Vikings were pursuing Everson Griffin, and when that fell through, that's when they decided to make another move. And again, it sounded like, according to Chad Graff, that they had checked in on Clowney, on Jadeveon Clowney, but that for whatever reason they didn't like that, either because of the style of player he was, maybe he was just not as good of a pressure producer and was more of a run stopper, or they just didn't like the deal, the terms that Clowney kind of had required of them. And again, they don't have like a ton of cap space or anything, so that might have been part of it, and so they decided to move on Ngakoue, who is younger. He's the same age as Danielle Hunter, so in theory, it's going to be difficult, but in theory, you could have them together for the next 8 years or something, which would be kind of like the most ideal scenario possible.
That is terrifying for many offensive linemen right there, because before you were looking at a situation where, okay, there's not the big name rusher. You're going to end up just tossing 2 or 3 guys over at Hunter, and then you're just going to have that open spot. Like if there's some sort of movement there, great, or whatever. But really, you're focusing on Hunter. This does cause offenses to have to plan for both areas of attack now.
Yeah, for sure. We asked Zimmer about whether teams have to kind of pick their poison in terms of who they'll double team. And if you take a look at double team rates, the Vikings, both Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin, were below average in terms of the amount of double teams they saw. And I think that's in part because of, they were both playing on the same line at the same time. And so you had to pick your poison. They also had somewhat slightly below average win rates against double teams. So, we'll kind of see what that looks like. But Ngakoue in his final year, because Calais Campbell was playing on the inside and Josh Allen was playing on the other side, Ngakoue in his final year was the focus, so he saw a lot more double teams. And so I think that rate will go down. Maybe the Vikings schematically also prevent double teams. I think that's the case because the way they like overload the box and create overload pressures and stuff like that. So they create a lot of one-on-one matchups. So he'll probably see more single teams than he did in Jacksonville, in part because he has Danielle Hunter to draw pressure off of him and because of the scheme that the Vikings demonstrate or put into place defensively. And because, like you just mentioned, it's just going to be difficult for offenses to kind of figure out what they want to do. In college, the answer would be, well, you run it in Ngakoue because he's the weaker run defender by a really significant margin. But in the NFL, that's a problem because passing is just so much more efficient than running, even when you've isolated a weakness in the running game, unless you've got kind of like this Derrick Henry or Lamar Jackson advantage where you can consistently do it, or there's a schematic weakness like Kaepernick against the Packers in the playoffs. Like there's just something there. Like unless that's the case, you're probably going to be hurting yourself by attempting to do that. So, Zimmer mentioned that he doesn't really think that that's the case. Teams will always find a way, but he was talking more about chips and finding ways to generate additional contact before releasing into routes and less about double teams. Zimmer's done a really great job of scheming Danielle Hunter up against like tight ends. So they'll find a way to avoid the double team situation for Ngakoue, and I think it's going to be helpful for both of them to be able to take pressure off of each other.
So it seems like forever ago, but the 2017 Jags were an impressive team. They damn near made the Super Bowl. They were quite amazing on defense. It's that offense that it was the problem, but that defense was astonishing. And then they fell the hell off, and now I think there's 3 players, maybe 4, who are still on the team from that 2017 squad, and one of the best names from that entire team was Ngakoue. He had an unbelievable 2017 year.
Yeah, he generated, I want to say 7 forced fumbles, if you include the playoffs, and he had maybe 6 fumble recoveries. He directly led to 4 touchdowns from the defense, and then he set up, I think, 2 other offensive touchdowns. Just like an enormous impact from that, and I think that his ability to produce turnovers. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago in the Football Machine when someone had asked about an Ngakoue trade. Maybe it was just Sam. Maybe Sam had just asked about the Ngakoue trade, and I was like, well, one of the things you get is a person who really just knows how to follow the ball and generate turnovers. And so, that's fallen off. He didn't generate any forced fumbles in 2018, but he produced 4 in 2019. And so you take a look, you go all the way back to 2016 when he entered the league, and I think he's like 3rd or something in forced fumbles, which is just really impressive. And then you take a look at, the quarterbacks in the NFC North, and they all hold on to the ball a long time. Now, Stafford only does it because of the scheme. They were the deepest throwing team in the league last year. In other years, he's gotten rid of the ball quickly. In other years, he's held on to the ball a lot. It kind of just depends on what the offense asks. But, Trubisky and Foles both hold on to the ball a fair amount. Aaron Rodgers is well known for holding on to the ball a lot. Stafford is still in the same scheme. They don't have to go up against Cousins, right? Because they're on the same team. But, we know that he's got a fumble problem. So, that's something to take into account is that you'll have a couple of opportunities to generate some forced fumbles. And most fumbles get recovered at about a 50% rate, but if you split it out and look at quarterback fumbles versus the rest of the fumbles, quarterback fumbles, if I recall correctly, are recovered by the opposing team more often, whereas fumbles everywhere else are recovered by the original team slightly more often. So when we talk about fumble luck, that's something to kind of keep in mind. So that is something to remember. And obviously, that defense was built with just kind of like the Vikings defense that year was really phenomenal. That defense was built with, Pro Bowl quality or all pro quality, honestly, players at every level, right? Some of that was a product of, having good talent around them, like Deshaun Gibson at free safety. Some of that was genuinely just pure talent. Calais Campbell, Jalen Ramsey, really good examples of that. And so I think Miles Jack was still having a really great year that year. And AJ Boye was just a really great corner opposite that. And so, that combined, when you have all of that together, helped create that. And Jacksonville apparently is an environment that the players don't want to be in. All the Pro Bowlers that they had from that 2017 year, I think they had 6 of them. They all are gone.
Yeah, according to the Jaguars themselves, only 2 remain on this team right now. Of the people who started on defense, that insane defense, the Saxonville defense, the one that looked like it was going to potentially be like a dynasty sort of thing. Like, you're going to have to deal with this in the AFC South.
Yeah.
That's it. You were going to deal with that forever, and all but 2 are now gone. That's absurd.
Oh, wow. I'm taking a look at it. I'm trying to find the other one. Right. It's Miles Jackson. Who's the...
Avery.
Oh, yeah. The important one. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. No one else on that starting defense is still there. That is a testament to your front office right there.
No, it absolutely is. And all of these players left for different reasons. Like Telvin Smith, you can't really... Maybe you can, but I don't think you can really blame the Jaguars for that because, he retires. But Calais Campbell, you trade him away. Paul Posluszny retires. Jalen Ramsey wanted out, so he got out. AJ Boye wanted to seek more money, so he got more money. Tashawn Gibson found a great deal in Cleveland, I think, or no, he left Cleveland. Tashawn Gibson found a deal somewhere and has continued to find deals elsewhere. I don't think he's really kind of nailed it down. Malik Jackson, I think, went to, was it the Eagles or something? But Ngakoue made it clear that, the reason that he's no longer in Jacksonville right now is because he refused to play for Jacksonville, and he hated playing for them. So that is a problem for them. And Jacksonville has had a lot of cap space for a lot of years. And so in theory, if it was a money issue, they would have found a way to secure Jalen Ramsey long term. They would have found a way to secure AJ Boye. If they couldn't secure Jalen Ramsey, they should have been able to secure AJ Boye. They might have been able to hold on to Calais Campbell for another year instead of trading him to Baltimore, things like that. So, you can't do anything about Paul Posluszny retiring, and honestly, that's probably an upgrade. But for everything else, your front office should have been able to find a way to keep that team. Even Dante Fowler, who wasn't even a starter, I think, is gone. So you should have found a way to keep elements of that core together. I think even Aaron Colvin is gone. So so you go back into their depth chart and they're losing people too.
Yeah, it's just insane. This is quite the that is a full on exodus. Before we get into the mailbag of Ngakoue stuff, and there's a lot of mailbag here, is there anything you want to cover first?
So I asked around about Ngakoue just generally. I talked to some Jacksonville beat reporters and I asked, hey, so you covered this guy, what do you think? Or people who used to cover him. They say like he's a very serious person. He's very charitable, but he's very work-minded, forward-minded. So some of them were actually kind of surprised that he was kind of making a hubbub this offseason, which I think probably speaks to the gravity of the situation in his mind, that he needed to kind of speak up about it. One of the reasons the Jaguars didn't want to break the bank on a long-term deal, not that they would have been able to accomplish that, I guess, was his run defense. And so it's still kind of a factor in terms of the way that people make decisions about it. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. But talking to some of the people that wanted to discuss Ngakoue and kind of the way that he interacts, is that he's a pretty serious hard worker. So that's something I wouldn't have known if I didn't reach out. So there's that. And then it's very clear that everybody I talked to brought up this thing about run defense. So even though the numbers from a distance look pretty good, everybody who covered Ngakoue with the Jaguars has brought it up. And so that is something that for the Vikings would be a serious concern.
All right, let's go to the mailbag of Ngakoue stuff. We've got an Ngakoue mailbag, and then we have a real mailbag, or the normal mailbag anyway, with the random bits of stuff in it. So let's start
the real
off.
Mailbag, the one with no football questions.
Yes, well, there's a lot of football questions in it as a result of this too. So Jeff Johnson asks, "Is the trade good, and if so, how good on a goodness scale?" Which I suppose is the opposite of the poopy scale that we've been dealing with previously. But
so we're using the 11.0 to 10 scale.
Yes. Is the trade good?
Yeah, I would say it's probably 7.5 or 8 on a 0 to 10 scale. I think it's pretty good. Maybe an 8.5. And the reason for that is because if Ngakoue walks, right, and he has a fine season, but if he walks, and my expectation is that his season is going to be fine, the Vikings will probably get a compensatory third round pick in 2022, and so now you're weighing a second round pick plus a fourth round pick or fifth round pick, I guess, versus getting a third round pick back. And so, really, you just move down from the second round to the third round, and lost a fourth rounder or fifth rounder. To do that, to get 1 year of high level production, which by itself is not great, but that's the downside. That's the risk. And the upside is that you secure a long term deal. Apparently, according to Albert Breer tweeting a minute ago, as if this were live, Ngakoue and the Vikings have agreed to a 1 year, $12 million deal. So takes $6 million less and more. So $6.8 million less. Or $5.8 million less to play in Minnesota than he would have in Jacksonville. So that deal has been set. The Vikings still probably want to clear up about $5 million in cap space, or 4.5. So that's that's where you're at. And I think that if the Vikings
this is why I wanted to record later in the day. We have actual
so we have more details. Yeah. And so if they do secure a long-term deal and he gets around $19 million a year from the Vikings, prorated against a 2019 decrease, then I think that does end up being a pretty good deal because you end up trading a second round pick and a fifth round pick. So essentially, I think a good second round pick is about Kyle Rudolph, and a bad fourth round pick might be Drew Samia. You're trading, the opportunity to grab your next Kyle Rudolph and Drew Samia, or your next Dalvin Cook. That was a really good second round pick, or Mackenzie Alexander. I think that's kind of your range of positive outcomes in the second round. And say, positively, Jarius Wright in the fourth round, or, kind of negatively, in the fifth round, like Colby Gossett or something like that. So that's kind of where you're looking is those kinds of players. A player that will probably make the team for about 1 or 2 years and be an effective backup in the fourth round. A player that will threaten to start in the second round. That's what you're trading. And so I think that if you trade Dalvin Cook and a $2 million contract for Yannick Ngakoue and a $19 million contract, I think you're winning. And so that's kind of where you're at. And Dalvin Cook is a positive outcome, I think, for the second round picks. You're also trading away, your second round busts, busts for whatever reason, like your Javid bests and so on, right? Like it's not even his fault that he was a bust. And that's kind of where you're at. Or your Stephen Hills, I think, is a pretty good second round bust for the Jets. So that's, you're trading an opportunity to take a shot at Kyle Rudolph or, Stephen Hill, for the security of a 25-year-old who, honestly, that's kind of what an old rookie is, about 25 years old at this point in the season. And, the consumption of about, $14 additional million in cap space per year, up to $15 or $17 million additional cap space per year. And so that's what the trade is. And I think for the most part, that's pretty good. The original price was probably around a first round pick, and Jacksonville was just shutting it down, even though Ngakoue was refusing to negotiate with them. And so from that perspective, from that process perspective, not great. They probably could have gotten a first round pick for him if they had just picked up the phone instead of hanging it up from a different team. But instead, the Vikings were able to get below market value right before the season to address a critical need. So I think it's a win for the Vikings. I think you're on your 7.5, 8 win, or 8.7.5 or 8 on the opposite of poopiness scale. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's like a lights out win because you have to offer him that second contract, but I think he's a really good player.
I'd be curious to find out the full listing or the full breakdown of who's paying for what. Like what amount of this is being covered by Minnesota, or what amount is is happening through Jacksonville, because he was looking at losing, if he just sat out completely, he was looking at losing like $1 million per game, like per week on this on his Jacksonville deal if he decided not to suit up. So this is, I suppose it's the difference between, not making any money this year and like only losing 6. Like, that's not bad.
Yeah, that's not bad. Do you have to remember though that he probably lost about $25 million by not taking the long-term deal as soon as it was offered, as soon as it was available to him, because with 1 year left in the contract, they can offer him a deal, and they offered him apparently quite a lucrative deal, and he chose not to sign it, so he is playing on like $2 million or $1.5 million per year for 2 years. And instead of taking that deal. And so apparently, someone had calculated out his true loss was something like $25 million. Either that means, he has a bad agent, or that's how much he really disliked Jacksonville. So there's that. And then the additional possibility of taking a weekly game day check hit of the fine plus the lost game day salary of not reporting, that also, I think is really great pressure for him to agree to a deal with the Vikings.
Yeah. All right. Next question that we're going to have out of the Ngakoue stuff is from Ollie, who asks, do the Jags know that Vikings players don't get selected for the Pro Bowl? They only get in as alternates?
Yeah, you'd hope that they would do that research. But
well,
yeah.
you would hope, but here we are.
Yeah. I think that his opportunities to get a first ballot Pro Bowl selection are extremely slim.
Yeah. James asks, are we kicking Odenigbo inside? He's been productive from defensive tackle in the past.
Yeah, I asked Zimmer that because I think it's one of the first questions that you have. And he said, he'll have a role similar to last year, which, it has to be a huge blow to Odenigbo personally because he wanted to be a starter. He's about to hit restricted free agency, so not free agency. But if he had a big year, if he had put together like 11 and a half, maybe 14 sacks, and the Vikings placed a first-round tender on him for $3 million, another team might have jumped in and taken the first-round hit to have him. Now, given his age, I don't think that that's necessarily the case, but he was set up for a big payday 2 years down the road. And this kind of, hurts that, which sucks for him. But yeah, the role that Zimmer, mentioned for him was not a full-time switch to 3 technique, which was my first instinct. And I had written that in my instant reaction piece, that's a possibility. And that would potentially kind of resolve the question marks that are at that position. Still, I think that we'll see a really heavy dose of Odenigbo on the inside. I think that he's still the first backup you have on the edge. So, Hunter misses a game or something like that, Odenigbo is going to be playing, that sort of thing. So I think that we're going to see a lot more Odenigbo at 3 technique, but I think that just means that there's going to be a rotation of 3 techniques.
So here's the breaking stuff from Twitter at the moment. From Ngakoue himself, it's evident that my time in Jacksonville is up, but I want to say thank you to the organization for making it a home for myself for the 4 years, and that I'll never forget. That chapter is over with now. Nothing lasts forever, but I'm truly excited to start this new chapter. Skol. And from Tom Pelissaro, just worth mentioning that there's not a no tag clause, meaning Minnesota could franchise him in 2021. But everyone is hoping for a deal.
Yeah, and Albert Breer mentioned that he would be assigned the slotted defensive end tag number. So if he had agreed to like a $15 million deal with the Vikings, that would mean that the tag number is 120% of that $15 million, right? Which, I'm trying to find my computer's calculator. For some reason, it wasn't working. But that's around $18 million. And the current tag number is 17, and it's likely to drop, honestly. So that's something that kind of implicates his ability to get a tag, but instead he's just going to get the actual franchise tag number, whatever that ends up being. So that's interesting, is that the Vikings and Ngakoue agreed to a deal where if he gets tagged again, which is possible, like you said, then he'll get the tag number and not the higher 120% of whatever the current salary is number. So that's just kind of an interesting additional detail.
Yeah. So let's go to the next question, which is from Timothy, who asks, I've seen a lot of analytics people suggest that he's a bit overrated and may simply have benefited from the team around him. How much is there to that, do you think?
Well, there's a couple of ways to, I think, break this down. And I think one of them is not, to take a look at obviously sacks or anything like that. Most of the analytically minded people that evaluate pass rushers don't really like to take a look at sacks that are more an outcome than they are an effective process by which to evaluate. So I think that the best argument from an analytics perspective for him in his favor is his pass rush win rate, which they're tracked by two different organizations. They're probably judged differently. But the idea is it's irrelevant for this statistic whether or not they actually generate a pressure. Do they beat the offensive tackle or whoever they're lined up against and get past them? Whether or not that generates a pressure, who knows? That's really just a product of the play design and the quarterback. But the offensive tackle is trying to prevent you from winning on a passing snap and getting past them, and then from there it's in God's hands or whatever, right? One of the great things about that is that it is more predictive than sack rate is, and more predictive than pressure rate is. And pressure rate does a better job predicting sacks than sacks do. Well, pass rush win rate, given ESPN's research on this, also predicts it better than they do. And so does PFF's research. And what's really great, and I'll link this in the show notes, and I'll be referencing it in my more detailed breakdown, is that PFF's pass rush win rate isolates different situations. So there's true pass rush win rate, which gets rid of plays where there are extra rushers that consume up blockers, and so they get rid of unblocked sacks, they get rid of screens, they get rid of play action plays, they get rid of rollout plays, and they make sure that they adjust for time to throw. And so true pass rush win rate is even more predictive of future sack production than even ESPN's pass rush win rate. And you take a look at that kind of adjusted win rate, and Ngakoue is one of the better edge defenders based just off his 2019 season, a season that a lot of people think he had a down year in, and in many ways he kind of did. But you take a look at, say, Eric Armstead, who had a true pass rush win rate in PFFs of like 23%, or Jadeveon Clowney of 20.1% or something along those lines. Now, Ngakoue's wasn't nearly as high as that, but it was like 12.6%. So it was really high among projected free agents, and it certainly was pretty high compared to the edge defender group. And so it is likely that he'll continue to produce pressures and sacks going forward. And I think an additional thing to keep in mind is that he was dealing with a hamstring injury all of last year. And so when you take a look at what his sack rate was, what his pressure rate was, how his pressure rate fell from 14% in 2017 to 11.8%, which is above average, but certainly not elite. You need to keep in mind that he was dealing with a hamstring injury that for most of the season was impacting his physical capability. And so that is something that I think you look going forward and you say, well, it's unlikely, and it's not impossible, but it's unlikely that will continue to bug him. And so it's more likely that when he's physically healthy, he'll be able to generate more pressures and stuff like that. And then the ESPN pass rush win rate, he was 15th in the NFL among edge defenders, which again, not elite, but a pretty high level and a good thing to compare or rate with, Danielle Hunter. And it was an even better win rate than either Griffin or Hunter, although no one would argue that he's better than Griffin or Hunter at least. More that, the things that kind of predict these statistics actually have a lot of things to say that might predict a pretty good result for him. And then you take a look at it in terms of the way that he won. He could do a better job from a technical perspective on his power rushes, like I mentioned early. Now you pair him with probably the best defensive line coach in the NFL. There's a lot to unlock there, especially because one of the things that Andre Patterson is good at is identifying what the opposing tackle that week is susceptible to. And so there is an additional element there where I think you could argue that he's more likely to be closer to his 2017 form than he is his 2018 form or his 2019 form. So Yeah, there are reasons, I think, to be kind of skeptical, right? His pressure rate never hit, above 12% after that really excellent season. He hasn't been able to show that he can consistently generate those turnovers like he did in 2017. His run stops, or not his run stops, but his ability to consistently hold up against the run is a bit of an issue. But there's some elements there where, hey, his pressure rate went down, but his ability to create batted passes at the line of scrimmage, which also does a good job predicting future sacks, which is kind of weird, went up pretty significantly. I think he had like 6 pass breakups last year. So those are all things to kind of consider in this larger analytical profile.
Next question is going to be from Dr. Lawson, who asks, it seems like Yannick rushes from the 2-point stance quite often. Will the Vikings let him rush from a 2-point stance?
A little bit, especially on third down, but he does have a ton of rushes from the 3-point stance. So there's a couple of things where it kind of matters. So for the most part, you want to make sure that you're comparing people at the same position. And so for those purposes, a player rushing from a 2-point stance and a player rushing from a 3-point stance, those are the same position. But from the perspective of coaching a player and figuring out what they can do best, what a 3-point stance allows you to do, and this is why Jared Allen always wanted to rush from a 3-point stance, is it allows you to put your weight even further forward, and so off the snap you generate more kind of artificial burst or burst generated from the mechanical advantage that gravity provides, because you're leaning forward, you're actually a little bit off balance, and so that's what a 3-point stance can do. And in fact, he does that when he rushes from a 3-point stance, and in some of his best games he actually takes more rushes from a 3-point stance than a 2-point stance. From a 2-point stance, you can't quite do that. And then also your footwork is a little bit different. So I think it's, in a 2-point stance, your inside foot is up and your outside foot is down. From a 3-point stance, it's the other way. And so you kind of have to adjust the way that you attack the tackle based off of kind of which foot you get to lead with, and then therefore whether or not you can do something like a spin move, which requires your, inside foot up at the point that you do that spin move, and so on. And so it affects your timing. But the fact that he's done both at a pretty significant rate, I think tells you that it's not going to be kind of an issue, because he's pretty comfortable doing both, and he generates a lot of pressure in both situations. But I do like that question, because mechanically it does make a difference, and some players are just much better rushing from one than the other, even if, for the purposes of comparing positions, we should think of them as the same position. For the purposes of projecting a player going forward, we should take a serious look at kind of technically what they do.
Magnus asks, is chemistry between defensive ends a thing? Do certain styles match up better with each other, or is it just purely about getting the most pressure possible?
I don't think chemistry is a thing, but I think complementary play is a thing. And so chemistry, I think, would imply that the longer you're together, the more the synergistic effects kind of, fall into place, right? The more quarterback and a receiver are together, the more on the same page they'll be. They'll run, they'll have the same idea of what the option route will be. Like, oh, you're leveraged this way against a defender. Based off of like our 5 years of playing together, I know that you're going to cut inside instead of up. So I'll throw the ball right before the cut, and I know you'll be there. So there's that, right? But from an edge rusher perspective, they don't really play off each other in the same way. Instead, what teams used to do a lot is they used to have a strong side end and a weak side end, and the strong side end was usually much better at holding up against the run, at, having the ability to split double teams or hold the gap, and then the weak side end would more likely kind of rush around the outside, and that would allow the strong side end to take on tight ends in the running game and stuff like that. And so when teams would line up one tight end close to the line of scrimmage and would have the other side relatively free, you would end up having complementary play. And so it was stronger in the past, where you would end up having a strong side end and a weak side end. And if you take a look at college football recruiting or high school rankings, you have players listed as strong end or weak end, and that's what that's a reference to, is whether or not you're really a speed rusher, whether or not you've got the ability to hold up against double teams in the run game. And because teams like to rush to the strong side more often, or they used to, that was important. Now that's a lot less important, but it's still is kind of significant because if you've got that ability to line up somebody against a double team and know that they'll be able to kind of hold anchor, that frees up your other guy a little bit more. It's just a little bit less common. But knowing what your defensive ends can do and knowing that they've got different skill sets, that allows you to kind of, design your stunts, your twists, or whatever in ways that advantage what they're really good at. So, for example, if Danielle Hunter, and actually the best example is this was Aldon Smith and Justin Smith were really good at this, where Justin Smith would crash inside because that was something he was really good at, and he'd be really great at kind of taking the attention of whoever they have, and Aldon Smith would loop all the way back around the outside, and because the power that Justin Smith had to take on that tackle, that would allow that tackle and stunt to be really effective at generating pressure, and it's because they had different playing styles and different rushing styles that allowed that to occur. So there is complementary play. There is a small level of chemistry, but for the most part, it's not really chemistry. There just is a way to take advantage of the fact that you've got different skill sets that are better than if you had two identical players.
Ojibwe Pun asks, I'm sure you've thought of this angle, but please compare it to the Jared Allen trade.
Yeah, I think it's not quite as explosive as the Jared Allen trade. I think obviously a first round pick and a fourth round pick is a lot different than a second round pick and a fifth round pick. But also when he was with the Chiefs, and they placed him on a franchise tag, right? In 2008, and that's when the Vikings traded for him. Or I guess it was a first round pick and 2 third round picks. I don't know why it was first and a fourth. Jared Allen had already made the All-Pro team in 2007. In fact, his second year in the NFL, he had 11 sacks. The year after that, he just missed double-digit sacks, and then he got hit with a franchise tag after hitting 15.5 sacks. So he was a little bit more explosive in an era where it's slightly more difficult to get sacks. He was more well recognized as an All-Pro caliber player, as already one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, and the Vikings gave up more as a result of that. So I think it is a little bit different, but there's elements where it's the same, where, one team places a franchise tag on a player, and then after having done that, they trade them away for a good haul of picks. But it's not quite as explosive. Jared Allen, I think, is going to be remembered as one of the best Vikings of all time, and it's only because of the really strong history of defensive linemen that Jared Allen probably won't be kind of as strongly remembered among Vikings fans as, say, like Alan Page and John Randall and stuff like that. But everyone kind of knows he's an all-time great. And I think that everyone was kind of aware of that possibility when the Vikings traded for him. I don't really think Ngakoue is on the same trajectory, but I do think it's a really good starting point for kind of understanding maybe what impact that this will have. It's just, in this analogy, the Vikings already had Jared Allen and Danielle Hunter and then traded for maybe a Brian Robinson type guy. Really effective, really fantastic. Good that you did that, and you probably got, and he's better than Brian Robinson, and you probably got more than your money's worth. But it's the situation is just a little bit different than trading for Allen.
So, total side note, I found myself a couple days ago rewatching a bit of the 2009 season and ended up watching a bunch of Jared Allen videos for some reason, like for his seasons with the Vikings and on all of his sacks. And Jesus, was that guy fun to watch. And just so fun to just sit back and go, yeah, he's going to burn that guy, and there's not going to be a thing that that offensive lineman can do. He's just going to make him look silly. It's just, good Lord, it was so much, he's just so much fun to watch. Ryan asks, when Aaron Rodgers inexplicably pooped his bed early this morning, did he think that, I'm getting old, or I felt a disturbance?
I think, I think his collarbone swelled up. There was extra pressure in the air. That's
the more diplomatic answer. Also, if you had to put an expectation of where this takes the defense as a whole over this year, assuming Hunter isn't out too long, is this a top 10 defense?
So I want to address the Hunter thing really quickly. There are multiple people, Tom Pelissero, Courtney Cronin, Chad Graff, that are reporting that the Vikings are expecting Hunter to be fully, completely healthy and ready to go week one. So I am not that concerned about Danielle Hunter. I expect him to be ready and playing at full force. So not a concern there. Second, where does it take the defense? I think it was already kind of close to top 10. I think it was like maybe 12, maybe 8, but close to top 10 already. And I think this kind of solidifies that inside the top 10 because, I'm a little bit worried about regression for the defense. But remember, the Vikings were 6th in points allowed last year. And I think in points per drive were a little bit worse, but in some measures like EPA per play were a little bit better. So they were probably around a top 5 defense when you put it all together. And then the worry was that they drop out of the top 5 and potentially be kind of on the shadows outside of the top 10. And the offense would have to make up the difference, and that'd be really hard given that they traded away their best offensive player. So that's really difficult. But I think that improves their tolerances for that kind of thing, where the offense doesn't have to carry the team as much and that the team has the ability to kind of stop defenses. Just remember that a top 10 defense is still only in the top third, right? Like there's still, you still have like a third of the NFL about as good or better than you. So it's not great, but I do think that you solidify that a little bit more and you backstop a little bit against regression. I was just asked on the Locked On Packers podcast what I think for the Vikings win total, and I think probably half a win or 0.75 wins or something like that, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider that there's 22 starters, 24, 25 impact players on a team, in a 16-game season, getting half a win is really tough, especially when quarterback play determines so much of the wins that you're going to get, right? Like you can vary but 4 wins just from, quarterback play alone, given, the 24 players that you're going to be fielding outside of even the specialists. Like on average, I think, if you just averaged it out completely, every player might be worth, 0.6 wins, but then you take into account that a quarterback might be worth 4 of those wins. And now you're looking at, it's actually 0.3 wins. And now if you're looking at it with the quarterback takes out, half of your potential wins, now you're looking at everybody else generating a variance of about 1/6 of a win. So if you've got a player that's good enough to generate, half a win, I think that's really high level, and it's really hard to find that kind of player. So I think that this puts you around potentially another half win, which in a division that this is potentially this tight, where you can make the case that any of these teams can get 9 wins, and then it's even possible that all 4 teams in the division get 9 wins, and there's some weird tiebreaker that you have to use. Then I think that finding those small advantages is enormous, and I think that you might be in a situation where the top team is only 1.5 wins ahead of the bottom team in the division, and so you want to get into that wild card positioning or even into that positioning to win the NFC North, even if that just means you go like 9-6-1 or something like that. Like that would still be enormous, because if you didn't make this trade, maybe you went 8-7 or something like that, and now you don't have or 8-8, and now you don't have the ability to win the division just because you added one player.
Rattleclaw asks, is there any realistic scenario where the Vikings could retain Harris and Ngakoue after this year? If the cornerbacks play at average starting level and they can keep those 2 players, it looks like they could be an elite defense again for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, if the cornerbacks continue to improve, for sure in that scenario. The Vikings are evidently still looking for a long-term deal with Anthony Harris. I don't know if that's still the case in light of the Ngakoue trade, but I think it's possible. I think that instead you're making a choice with Dalvin Cook. I think that's kind of the big concern. And if the Vikings get Dalvin Cook to agree to like an $8 million a year contract, you might be able to squeeze all 3 of those players in. Who knows? You probably have to get rid of Riley Reif in that scenario, but I think that might be a foregone conclusion unless they have to restructure him to accommodate Ngakoue this year.
Or just completely jettison Kyle Rudolph after the year.
Yeah, and that's also possible too, right? And I think that was kind of in the cards anyway. I think that the Vikings weren't even necessarily planning on having Kyle Rudolph for this season, much less next season. So Yeah, it's possible. And I think if you lose Riley Reif and Kyle Rudolph and potentially even upgraded those positions, right? Because, Irv Smith to Kyle Rudolph, and then you find another backup tight end in the draft, Ezra Cleveland to left tackle, and then you find a guard or whatever in the draft. I don't know. Um, you might decrease your costs at those positions and still improve. Now, obviously, that's a super optimistic scenario. It could be very much the case that Ezra Cleveland struggles right now. Presage, struggles kind of just going forward, that he's just not Brian O'Neill, and that it would still leave us to hope that he is. But I think it's possible that you could jettison some contracts and retain all three. It's tough, though, and I think that you're probably making a decision between the three of them, and the Vikings have already decided that Ngakoue is one of them. So it's between Anthony Harris and Dalvin Cook. Personally, and I don't think Dalvin Cook is going to consume as much cap space as Anthony Harris would, but personally, I don't think anyone who listens to the podcast would be surprised that I think it should be Anthony Harris. And you should just find another back in the draft. Find two, I don't care. But
you are on record in supporting the principle of defunding the running back. Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and a big part of defunding programs is investing those resources into other programs. So instead of the running back program, we're going into what the data tells us is the more effective edge rusher and safety program.
You know what's terrible is I could tell you were grinning through that whole thing.
What are you can't. I don't talk with a smile.
Just like, I'm going to be super clever here, and I'm going to sit here and smile as I say this.
Let me be clear. I did not think I was being clever there at all. I just think I was being a shithead.
Well then, Ian Pauly asks, you always hear about how the pass rush can help a young secondary, in this case, the cornerback room. Is this more in the way of mitigating the mistakes, i.e. blown coverage, nullified by a sack / pressured throwaway, or is there other tangible value that helps them grow?
Well, aside from, covering up for mistakes like blown coverages, it changes the plays the offense wants to call, in theory, right? And so the reason that coverage is supposed to be more important than pass rush from an analytical perspective is because if the pass rush becomes good enough, right, and if the offense can expect that pass rush to consistently cause problems, then the response to that is to get rid of the ball quicker. And if you get rid of the ball quicker, that means you can't get, the ball doesn't go downfield because the receivers aren't in the routes often enough. And so what this does mean is that there are fewer downfield opportunities, not because of pressure and having to get rid of the ball, although that's true too, is that pressure will force them with more inaccurate throws. But it means that the offensive design is such that the corners won't be stressed by having to go deep as often, that they'll be covering simpler, shorter routes, that there's going to be more defenders around them by the nature of shorter routes to help clean up against yards after the catch. So that's, I think, the biggest impact. The second biggest impact is what I mentioned, is that quarterbacks who play under pressure are worse. Every quarterback gets worse under pressure, except in weird sample size circumstances that get resolved by the next season. I think Tom Brady loses like 40 points in passer rating or something like that when he's under pressure versus in a clean pocket. Every quarterback gets worse. And one of the ways they get worse is that their accuracy drops, usually because they're engaging in off-platform throws and they're moving in the pocket, or their normal ball trajectory is impacted by a pass rusher on the lane, and so they have to change the trajectory of the ball or whatever, right? But their accuracy decreases, their decision-making gets worse, and it increases turnover rate. And so that's the second way, is that it's really easy to defend a receiver if the ball isn't coming anywhere near them, which I think the Vikings have been finding out in camp, given how poorly the quarterbacks have been playing. You don't have to worry about giving up yards if the ball is just not near the receiver. So that's part of it too, is that the pressure itself creates easier situations. And the final thing actually is the sacks preventing a coverage mistake, because sacks are such low frequency events and blown coverages are low frequency events, that the two of them occurring at the same time is really difficult, especially because a blown coverage is usually found pretty quickly. And so a sack usually can't get there in time anyway. So when a sack can cover up for a blown coverage, that doesn't happen very often at all. It's really about forcing shorter throws and creating more inaccurate throws than it is about making it such that a play where the cornerback made a mistake is now off the books because of a sack.
Next question is going to be from Don from Ohio, who asks, realistically, will the Vikings offer both Ngakoue and Hunter the same contract or close to it to keep them both happy, or does one offer more than the other? And I pulled up Spotrac to just look at what the base salary was this year. And for Danielle Hunter, it's $3.4 million.
Well, I mean, that's just the base salary.
Well, yeah, it's just like the yearly cash listed at $12 million, but it's just like that's your that's your base for that. Jeez.
But yeah, and that's just the nature of these deals. I mean, it's because he was able to cash in on a huge signing bonus. So he gets a bunch of money coming in this year in terms of cash, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
His cap number for 2020 is $9 million, but for 2021 is $17.8 million.
This is still just an absolutely absurd deal. Like this whole deal just is insane.
Yes, it is. And when Ngakoue agrees to, or if I should say, Ngakoue agrees to a deal with the Vikings, it will probably be around that $19 million mark that he rejected from the Jaguars. He was so fed up with them that apparently, reportedly, he was asking for $22 million from them, which they just, they weren't going to do, right? Because he's not Von Miller, right? So he was asking for an absurd amount. I don't think that's what he's asking for the Vikings, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was around 19 a year. And over the next 3 years, Danielle Hunter's contract is significantly less than that, right? Like, I think, let me do the quick math. His cap hit over the next 3 years, which is not his cash flow, but his cap hit over the next 3 years is an average of 16.8. So whatever Ngakoue's deal is, it's going to be potentially $2.5–3 million more in terms of cap hit per year over the course of the deal than Danielle Hunter's. And Hunter is a better player. They're both the same age. And so at some point, you're going to have to renegotiate Hunter's contract. I don't think it has to happen soon. I think that you can do it in 2022 and come up with a solution that replaces the 2022 year, the 2023 year, and then add 2 or 3 more years onto the deal. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. I don't think that they'll offer them the same contract because those contracts will be offered in staggered years apart from each other. They won't really they won't be negotiated at the same time. So it would be kind of fun, right? Because at the same age, they get the same contract. They're working on the opposite side of each other.
Matchy.
But that's not really yeah, matchy. But that's not how it works. Hunter's a better player, and his contract terms are different.
Dusty O'Connell, the Dusty O'Connell, has emerged from his bunker of sorts and asked, what is the best Yannick Ngakoue anagram? And I plugged it in, and the one I came up with was Kink Nuance Yoga.
You can't really beat that.
Nope.
I looked at a couple of other ones. Canine Gunk Okay. That one's kind of fun.
That has different implications.
It's just how, like, is it okay, if you're going to take care of your dog, it's got that stuff in his teeth, you got to give him the teeth brushing. Mm-hmm. So there's that. There's Uncanny Koi Cage. I just like how that sounds.
There's a lot of interesting vowel sounds on that one. Yeah.
So Uncanny Koi Cage, that one's good. Then there's Iguana Nakien, that's okay. And then there's a bunch for guinea and iguana, but the rest of the words that you can come up with that are not nearly as interesting. So, yeah, Canyon Cage Cooney, that's okay. Canyon Gaki Nuke, I don't even know what Gaki means, but that's apparently one of them. But it's got the word nuke in it, so I was like pretty excited about that one.
Wow. Speaking of things that have excited Arif over the past few days, let's go to our next news story. We'll hit the next mailbag stuff in just a second, but our next news story of the weekend involved Mitch Trubisky discovering that he might have an issue throwing to the left. Arif died at this reveal on Twitter.
I am a god.
No, it's the Bill Murray thing from Groundhog's Day. I don't know. I don't think I'm the god. I just know I'm a god.
Right, exactly.
So this terrible quality video, which apparently just happens for all things involving the Bears, whether it be all 22 or this, had Mitch Trubisky talking in a Zoom meeting about things that he was working on. And what is he working on, Arif?
Right. So I want to be clear about the quality of this video. It was very clear that he was in a Zoom meeting from his phone, and the video uploaded to the website, chicagobears.com, is identical in quality to the video I tweeted out. So just want to be clear, it wasn't because of like screen recording software or downloading problems. That's the video quality we got. First. Second, he talked about a lot of things. You know, he wants to improve his accuracy throwing deep downfield. You know, that's important to him. He wants to improve his decision making, make quicker decisions. You know, he's especially been working on throwing outside the numbers to his left. Yeah. I mean, the fact that he said he's got to throw to his left better out loud in a meeting. Good Lord, I'm floating. Holy crap.
Arif ascended that particular moment. He'd reached his hand up for a high five from God, and God just went bam. Like
I've never had a meme actualize itself so concretely. Like the fact that Nick Wright on like Fox Sports 1 or whatever talked about this way back when he was like, yeah, the Bears are concerned he can't throw to his left. But I don't know if that was the case, but like clearly that's a product of like the internet meme that he can't throw to his left. The Ringer wrote up an investigation into whether or not, you know, this internet thing about whether or not Mitch Trubisky can throw to his left was
and
real.
Cited your tweets endlessly.
Yeah, which is just amazing. So, like, all credit where credit is due. The first person to notice this was Derek Clausen, and he wrote it in Football Outsiders, their almanac. So, really credit to Roger Sherman at The Ringer for clarifying that this was the first person to, like, find it. But to make it an internet thing, Roger credited me, and I humbly accept that that's the truth. That Byron Left Watch had become reality, that I'm living rent-free in Mitch Trubisky's head. This now makes it credibly likely that my takes have reached 2 NFL quarterbacks for teams I don't cover. There's a rumor that Carson Wentz knows who I am. That's amazing, too.
Well, Carson Wentz probably also ended up getting a new contract with AT&T, and as a result, AT&T is giving out things with for the it's either AT&T or T-Mobile. He's like, I'm going to do this just so I can get the thing with the Athletic as well. And so he's just sitting there reading your articles, like, why does he hate me? Why?
What's going on?
Why? That's actually what he's reading now that he hurt himself in training training camp during tight end drills.
Oh God, the arc of the universe bends towards my takes.
This is canon. This is more canon than anything else. This proves that it exists. This proves that it is a thing. That he's actually talking about this is astonishing.
Right. And now Bears fans can't complain about me taking this thing and running with it because I'm right, retrospectively.
Which is the second best way to be right. You really want to be technically correct, but this is also good.
That's true. Yeah, technically correct, tier 1. This retrospective correctness, tier 2. I will say this continues to add to the evidence that I'm the protagonist of reality and that the rest of you are 2D characters in the novel that is my life. So.
We're all just walking through that side scroller house from Property Brothers. That's all we are. We are just all slowly walking through it. And you are sitting there just giggling maniacally as you talked this into existence. Let's go into the real mailbag here. And Viking After Dark asks a really interesting question. What is a bigger asset to the team? Losing Stephon Diggs and adding Yannick, or not losing Diggs and keeping the roster as is? Now, for the as is, I'm going to include with the loss of Everson Griffin.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Otherwise, I think it would be a pretty unfairly slanted question in favor of keeping the roster. I would say it's better to keep Stephon Diggs. rather than acquire Yannick. I think his name is actually pronounced Yannick. Zimmer corrected us on the phone call. I'm going to be really bad about pronouncing it for a while, and so I'm going to have probably two pronunciations while I talk about him. But yeah, I guess it's Yannick. I don't know. I want to hear him say it because people have become really comfortable saying Yannick. So we'll see.
This is Minnesota. We're talking this whole like ethnic sounding name thing. It takes a while.
Right. Yeah, it takes a bit. So yeah, we'll figure it out. But Ngakoue is a top 15 pass rusher. Stephon Diggs is probably a top 10 receiver, and receiver is a more important position than pass rusher. And it is much easier to scheme around not having a high-level pass rusher than it is not having a high-level receiver. And the only thing that can kind of counter this, right, is what your replacement level is. And so, in a world without Stephon Diggs, you've traded away a first-round pick. That means you get Justin Jefferson, right? And so you're replacing him, in theory, with Justin Jefferson. Obviously, the actual replacement on the field will be Adam Thielen and then, whatever, right? But in terms of just kind of moving up the talent chart, it's Justin Jefferson. Whereas here, and you're probably more confident in the long-term prospects of Justin Jefferson than you are the long-term prospects of Ifeadi Odenigbo, even though I like Ifeadi. So there is that to consider. But every year you kind of project forward is another year you've got the opportunity to adjust for that, right? To sign a free agent pass rusher or to draft a receiver or something like that. And so really the best way to evaluate that is probably the year one impact. And I think from a depth perspective, Ifeadi probably has a bigger impact than Justin Jefferson. So even there, I think that your replacement level player, at least in year one, favors the argument even more, is that the drop-off from Yannick to Ifeadi is smaller than the drop-off from Diggs to Jefferson based off of what we've seen so far. So I think that there's a couple of reasons that you would rather keep Stephon Diggs. Now, part of that is also like, just look at the trade value. Stephon Diggs was traded for way more than Yannick was, but that's not necessarily fair because the Vikings, if they really wanted to, so apparently the call and the trade occurred on the same day, but the Vikings, if they really wanted to, could have, held on to Diggs for much longer, and the price probably would have dropped, right? So that's what the Jaguars did, is that they held on to Yannick for longer than they should have, and then the price dropped. And so the Vikings could have done that. So maybe they would have ended up having the same trade value. But I do think that is a small clue, right? That, Diggs went for quite a bit more than Yannick. So I think that for the Vikings and just in general, I think that it would have been better to keep Stephon Diggs and not have the opportunity to acquire Ngakoue than the other way around. But it sounds like their hand was forced with Diggs, I guess, just like the Jaguars' hand was forced with Ngakoue. The Vikings did a better job of recognizing what that meant and acting on it and getting a better return.
Clearly, Ngakoue's Twitter game just needs to be better.
Yeah, I mean, what is this? I want to say thank you to the organization for making it a home for it. Why not stuff like not this again? Come on, man.
Exactly. Brian Jellerson asks, we seem to be very good at acquiring talent through free agency or trades on the defensive side and not so great on the offensive side, aside from Cousins, I guess. He's more of a work in progress, I guess.
That's fair.
Is it just harder across the board to assess talent? Is it a money issue? Is it us? It's us, isn't it?
I don't think that there's any evidence that free agency signings on the defensive side of the ball succeed at a higher rate in general for the NFL than on the offensive side of the ball. And you can just kind of take a look at some of the players that we mentioned when we were talking about the Jaguars, right? Tashaun Gibson got a pretty good contract defensively and has not lived up to what he did in 2017 by any reasonable stretch of the imagination. AJ Bouye is playing well, but he's not playing nearly as well as his contract or as he played in Jacksonville, right? And so there are all kinds of defensive free agents that haven't lived up, or defensive transactions that haven't lived up to their trade value. I think Jadeveon Clowney, for example, played probably better in Houston than he did in Seattle. And obviously, there's all kinds of the opposite, right? Where, like Frank Clark was a great trade for the Chiefs, and D Ford was a good trade for the 49ers and stuff like that. But, you take a look at offensive free agents, and most of them tend to succeed if they're high value offensive free agents, just like most defensive free agents tend to succeed. So, I don't know that it's generally true, but I would not be shocked if for the Vikings it was true, right? And you take a look at kind of the big name free agents. So if we ignore like the Tom Johnsons that they just found in free agency and he kind of blew up to be a really high level player. If you take a look at the big free agents, Captain Munderland, Linval Joseph, Terrence Newman, obviously we don't know about Michael Pierce yet, but we'll see kind of how Yannick Ngakoue and Michael Pierce do. But the bigger names for the Vikings to have signed in free agency, they've worked out. And I think a lot of that is just the Vikings know what's going to work for them on defense. Some of these players they're familiar with for whatever reason, the Vikings worked with, or Mike Zimmer worked with Terrence Newman before. And so they know to a really hyper degree based off of who they have on their coaching staff, what skills translate and what skills don't. Whereas offensively, first, you're going through a bunch of different offensive coordinators. So what works for one offensive coordinator is not going to work for another. And that's really important because take a look at Captain Munderland. If he fails with the Vikings because of his 2014 season, and his 2014 season was really bad, but he had time to stick with the same defense for a while, he ended up turning into a pretty good slot corner for the Vikings. Now, if that occurs on the offense, right, and then you change offensive coordinators, now suddenly the skill set you paid for is not the one you need. And so they struggled learning the system year one. Now they're ready to deploy the skill set and the system they learned year two. It's a different system. So there's that too, is that you had continuity on the defense where you didn't have it on offense. I think that's part of it. And some of it, some of it's just kind of random chance, right? Like, I don't know for a fact. I mean, I liked the Linval Joseph signing a lot when it happened, but I didn't know for a fact that it'd be good. I liked the Alex Boone signing a lot. And by all means, he probably should have succeeded based off of the fact that he played in a zone style system, or I should say a multiple style system in San Francisco, where they did a bunch of zone, a bunch of power, a bunch of gap, a bunch of just kind of unusual runs with like trap blocks and stuff like that. And he was good at all of it. Right. And he was good at drop back pass protection. He was good at protecting a mobile quarterback like Colin Kaepernick. He was good at protecting a quarterback that at the time wanted to stay in the pocket, and Alex Smith. And you bring him to the Vikings and it's just not working out. Right. So I think that some of that is just its chance. But some of it is just you've got a more experienced defensive staff that knows what it wants, that's got better communication with the front office. You've got continuity on defense that allows kind of missteps early in the free agency process for those players that have just signed contracts to get acclimated to the system. And then, there's variance. So I think that all plays a role.
So we covered most of this question last episode, but the second part we didn't. Tampa Bay Vipers for Life asks, on the backup quarterback front,
that name so much.
Who has looked best, and will they carry 2 or 3 QBs this year?
I think they'll carry 2 because of the practice squad rules and the advantages that you get. You get 16 practice squad players. You can protect 4 of them. I assume the Vikings will probably protect their third quarterback. And I think it's going to be 2. And I think that they're going to keep Sean Mannion for his sideline capability and his ability to consistently help Kirk Cousins break down defenses, respond kind of quickly on the sideline to defensive adjustments or changes, and so on, and be a second set of eyes on the field. But also, Jake Browning has not looked that good. And I really expected him to take a big step this year because he looked pretty good in the preseason last year. Got to be careful about that. Taylor Heineke looked pretty good in the preseason. Now, mind you, something happened in between.
Yeah, that had, that wasn't like, it wasn't like Sloter where, the regular season would start or, and he just, froze. This is something like, he just happened to try to walk through glass.
Right. So it was a little bit different. But yeah, Kyle Sloter looked really great in the preseason. In fact, I think he has the best preseason performance that we have statistics going back to like 98 or something like that. So like number 1 in preseason, just net yards per attempt. I forget what the cutoff is, but I think number 1 is Kyle Sloter and number 2 is Sage Rosenfels. So amazing, right? And number 3 is like Tom Brady or something like that. Some nobody. But yeah, so you got to be careful, they got a really good preseason. And what does that mean? But I thought that, the reason that the Vikings kept him is because they thought that what he did translated better going forward than with Kyle Sloter, who I guess improvised quite a bit more than the Vikings were comfortable with, and in a way that wasn't going to consistently produce wins at the NFL level, whereas Jake Browning would consistently kind of follow the play. Now in camp, he's just been not that great. His accuracy hasn't been there. His arm strength has been spotty. At sometimes he has really great arm strength, the kind of stuff that you saw from him in 2016 when he was first talked about as a prospect, and really, weak arm strength where, it's kind of fading and it doesn't get to the receiver on time. He's checking down way too much, and all the Vikings quarterbacks were checking down a lot. So obviously a lot of play design has a role in this. But yeah, I think he's checking down more than everyone else. The timing isn't great for him. As soon as he gets to the top of the drop, he's waiting a little bit too long. And so he's not throwing receivers open. He's scrambling way too quickly to get out of, sometimes the pressure is not even there, quote unquote pressure in camp. So Sean Mannion has played on time within the constraints of the offense. He's been appropriately aggressive. I think he's the better quarterback of the two of them. I think he's playing better than the two of them. It really sucks to say because I don't think a lot of Sean Mannion. I don't think very highly of him as a backup quarterback, and he's not very accurate. So Browning is more accurate than him. So he's got that. But all the other elements of quarterback play, Mannion seems to be performing better. And so I think it's pretty clear that Mannion should be the number 2 and is the number 2. Browning should be the 3 and is the number 3. And I think that given the practice squad rules, the Vikings will keep 2 quarterbacks instead of 3.
Josh asks, with Ezra Cleveland at guard on the depth chart and not moving to tackle even after Reef getting a break, is the team planning on keeping Cleveland at guard? Is left tackle still a need?
Yeah. So interestingly, today, there was a Veterans Day off last day at camp. So Riley Reef didn't play tackle, and last time they just moved Rashad Hill to left tackle. Today, as of this recording, Sunday, right? I'm losing track of days. Which I guess everyone was the whole time, but now I also lose track of days during training camp generally, so there's that to deal with too. So this time it was Oli Udoh playing right tackle and Brian O'Neill playing left tackle. And if they're willing to kind of do that much, it brings up the question of where is Ezra Cleveland? If they're not pushing him to left tackle in a situation where he can get some left tackle reps, what are we doing? So that is a cause for concern. I'm not that worried yet. I think that if you were to define what a bust would look like for Ezra Cleveland, it would look a lot like this. So I get why people are worried, but there's a lot of scenarios where this turns out pretty well. Remember, Jason Peters was cut by his first team. Now, he wasn't a second-round pick. He's an undrafted free agent. But, it's something to kind of think about. I think that when we compare him to Brian O'Neill, we need to be careful about a couple of things. And one of them is that Brian O'Neill had a full offseason before he got to play. Ezra Cleveland doesn't have that. His first practice with the Vikings occurred this month in August. Brian O'Neill was taking reps in May. So that's a big one. And he was able to learn the offense on the field with the rest of the offense and with direct contact with the offensive line coach, and was able to do direct technique work right away. Ezra Cleveland didn't have that. 2, Ezra Cleveland, at least for this year, is switching positions. Brian O'Neill switched sides, but not positions. And so he has to play a different style of football than he played in college, which Brian O'Neill did not, especially because there was a lot of zone running at Pitt. So that, I think, in conjunction with the fact that the offseason was friendlier to Brian O'Neill, tells us a little bit. And then also, O'Neill didn't take over until week 5 or something like that. So he didn't even start right away. So those are all things to keep in mind when we make these comparisons. So it's not, you can't make them 1-to-1. That said, I think the seeds of worry have been planted, and that's fine. It's fine to be kind of a little bit concerned. I just wouldn't raise alarm bells or anything like that, kind of this early into an admittedly already developmental project's career. So we'll kind of see. It is interesting that the Vikings didn't choose to do that. It brings up the question of whether or not that kind of see him as a long-term left tackle. They also didn't get the chance to do the experimentation that you normally would in this situation like this, where you would play Riley Reef at guard and Ezra Cleveland at tackle. that's something that they would have probably explored in OTAs to see if that was something that would have worked out all right, and they just didn't have that time. So that's part of it too. Yeah, it is kind of weird. I don't think the long-term plan for Cleveland is for him to be a guard. He is just not really a fit for that position from a scouting perspective. I think it's just to kind of get him some experience right away, playing in the NFL, and then he's going to be immediate depth at guard for them, where they don't really. I mean, they clearly don't think a ton of Drew Samia at this point. I don't think Aviante Collins makes the roster, despite taking reps with the ones. So that gets you depth at guard. The Vikings have a ton of depth at tackle. They've Oli Udoh and Rashad Hill. They've got a ton of depth at tackle. They need depth at guard, and so they cross-train somebody at guard. So that is the idea. But yeah, I understand why people are worried.
Secondary question, since this is now a relationship podcast, how early is too early for Halloween movies and fall decor? There have been disagreements.
Decor, I think you get a little bit more leeway because it just takes longer to set up. So whenever works. But I think for that, you get about a month. Now, if fall is a season, that's different than like Halloween as a season in terms of decor. And so that's a little bit different. I would feel weird about putting up fall stuff in the middle of like 90-degree heat. But I mean, I guess like the coffee shops are rolling out with pumpkin spice already. So, who knows? Maybe it's pumpkin spice creep. Maybe don't use that as your guide. But
that should be just the bellwether. That should just be okay. Well, pumpkin spice is out. We can start putting the disembodied
honestly, it's
heads.
just we have to keep track of whether or not pumpkin spice is advancing into the summer. Because if it is, you can't use it. But if it's not, that's your sign that you can put up fall stuff. It is almost September, so I guess I get it. But for now, let's keep track of pumpkin spice creep and say when they start rolling out pumpkin spice at Starbucks, that's when you can put up fall decor. For specific holidays, Christmas, Halloween, I think it's about 30 days. You can probably fudge it by a couple of days in either direction because putting up stuff just takes time, so you got to work it with your schedule. And I think you probably get 2 weeks after the holiday to take it down. And as for movies, I think movies cannot exist without the atmosphere for those movies to feel appropriate for the weather, and part of that is decor. So no matter what happens, I think movies have a shorter, appropriate time frame to watch, and they're just easier to pop in. So you don't have to work it when you can work it. You can plan around it a lot easier. So I think for that, 2.5 weeks before the holiday is when you can start watching like Halloween movies or Christmas movies, which I know Christmas movies start immediately after Thanksgiving, but I don't like that. So my rule is you got to wait a little bit more.
See, I think there should be two. You can use one or two different ways to determine when it's okay to start decorating for Halloween. The first one, obviously, being the pumpkin spice barometer, which we both agree on. The second one,
fall. I think for Halloween, you get the 30 days. That's different.
Well, for decoration, I don't know. I think for decoration, I think you should be allowed to go to use the pumpkin spice. Also, speaking of, you could also go to your local university and drive by, and if the women are dressed like Han Solo, that means you can start to do Halloween stuff. You can start planning around it because it's cold enough to be able to wear the black legging, the vest and everything. If it hits that point, you're probably okay.
I mean, hold on, I got to look this up real quick.
Are you looking up the Han Solo look?
No, because I was saying if they're dressed like Han Solo, they might also be dressed like, and I was trying to remember the protagonist of Rogue One, Jyn Erso. What a terrible name. Good Lord.
You just do not like that movie.
Yeah, because it doesn't have any characters in it.
Okay.
There's no characters. There's no character arc. She's mad because her parents died. I just described every Star Wars movie. What makes her interesting?
Okay, we're going to go into this like full bore in a Patreon episode because I really like that movie. And we're both gonna look at it.
I'm glad Darth Vader showed up and made things interesting. I'm real happy for you.
Okay.
Planet Go Boom. Wow, great movie.
Moving on. Eli misspelled something here. I really want to be excited about the parody between Gladney and Dantzler, but then I remembered that I'm a Vikings fan and now I'm bracing for disappointment.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to this. Sure, that makes sense. The franchise has not given you any reason to react otherwise. I will say, based off of what's happening in camp, that the Vikings might get fairly reasonable production out of the position. Does not look like you'll get a Tre'Davious White rookie performance from either of them, although Cameron Dantzler seems potentially closer to that. But it does seem like you'll get average or even better than average starting cornerback play from them based off of what we've seen in camp for whoever wins that position. So I would say I'm more optimistic now about the prospects for that starting cornerback group than I was entering camp. And I think that that's a really good sign because I was very worried about it.
Swervin says, I'm just going to go with that. Swervin, maybe. I recently got a Komodo-style smoker. I've smoked and grilled tri-tip, pulled pork, steaks, burgers, chicken thighs, and ribs. I'm doing salmon tonight. What should I do next? So, in case you're not familiar with the style of this means like a big green egg style smoker, which is like the most popular type of the Komodo-style smoker. So, if that's your question, then it seems like you're looking for something more obscure. So I would go with doing something like a pastrami, which is going to involve you doing a brisket, which you apparently are trying to avoid here. Like if you're doing all of these things,
there were two things I was looking for, and brisket was one of them. I was kind of surprised.
Yeah, so you'd probably be looking at you can do like a smoked pastrami on there. You can also do lamb too. Like lamb is an option. There's a couple of cool ideas you can do with lamb. Also, what you could do in something I have done before is do pulled pork, and then the additional pulled pork that you have as a side, or like that's just your leftovers. Toss that into barbecue baked beans, and just do beans on the smoker for a couple of hours too. So these are just the ideas I was coming up with. I went to howtobarbecueright.com because Malcolm Reed is my Lord and Savior of barbecue. I really like his stuff. I've mentioned him on the show before, and I should have said when there was a question the other day of what YouTube personality would you like to eat their food the most, I should have said Malcolm Reed. Somebody said I should have said Matty Matheson too, but I think Matty Matheson's just insane. But the food looks good though.
It's just insane.
It might just be a ploy to make me do my Matty Matheson impression again. So, which isn't a terrible thing to do, but yeah, I would go with those: the apple bourbon barbecue beans, the smoked pastrami, and the grilled rack of lamb on the big green egg. Recipes are all on howtobarbecueright.com, and I highly suggest you check them out.
Yeah. So. That's all good. I would also suggest making your own bacon. Kind of surprised that wasn't on the list. So apparently making your own bacon, aside from just like how friggin' cool it is, just like tastes way better because you don't have to find a way to preserve it for shipping. And I'm not a huge, I care about preservatives guy because, whatever, right? But you don't have to worry about the way that they sometimes pack pork with water-filled preservatives that leach out the flavor and stuff like that. And so you're assured the quality of your pork belly and assured the quality of your bacon. And you can cut it however you want. And so you can make smoked pork belly / bacon like kimchi buns, right? And you can cut it to be appropriate to that. Or you can make breakfast bacon and cut it to be appropriate to that. So that's something I would recommend. And then also, because, if you want to waste your time, because everybody always talks about, oh, Reef, you just haven't had smoked turkey yet. That's good. Figure that. See if that's any good, if you got an extra day or whatever. Because you're asking for ideas. If you want to waste money and time, smoke a turkey.
Well, if you're going to do a smoked turkey, you probably want to do a brine with it too. So you're going to need an additional day on top of that. But yes, that is something that I have even looked potentially into, but have just I am at that point.
When I am campaigning my holy writ against turkey that Arif, I agree with you, but there's this exception, and this is one of the exceptions that people talk about. The other one is a deep fried turkey, which I get it, but like deep fried anything, just figure your life out, guys.
Jesus. You know what's great is you found a way to muscle in the turkey thing, because early this morning I got the tweet about whether or not we should do the recording. And it was Trubisky, it was the trade, and it was turkey. And my only response was, did something happen with turkey that I'm not aware of? Or is this just a callback? Oh, it's just a callback. Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't something.
It's been a strong day for the brand. Let's keep it going.
Yeah, let's just keep this rolling. One day if this COVID thing finally ends and I find myself in a position where I'm cooking and you and your lady friend happen to be in attendance, I think what I'm going to do is the recipe for you're familiar with burnt ends from a brisket, correct?
Familiar.
Obviously.
Yeah,
well, I'm just saying when
we went to, I just want to share this story real quick. When we went to Kansas City, we got the last burnt ends at that Oklahoma Joe's, and a lot of it, and then used it in an omelet the next day. So burnt ends are like my favorite thing on the planet.
Touching the face of God on that. I've made I've made bacon burnt ends before, in a similar style.
That sounds phenomenal.
Yeah, I've made them for the kids. It's candy. I've made them for the kids. I've made them for the neighbors. It is astonishingly good, and it's just the slab bacon cut up and treated right. It's so delicious. So yeah, you need more bacon in your life, quite frankly. And I'm gonna do my. I was like, I'll do my best to help out with that. This actually isn't in the show notes. I just got this in from Kyle Slaby, who says, regarding last episode, clearly Raul's movie plot revolves around James discovering time travel and using it to give Blair Walsh faulty information on the wind trajectory at the bank on January 10th, 2016. The since disgraced kicker vowed revenge on James. Now Arif must save the day. So the idea is I create time travel and then you discover my notes. That
Oh, okay, but why would you do that? Like, I mean, I know why you would create time travel, but why would you use it to tell Blair Walsh the wrong stuff about the playoff game?
Maybe I gave him faulty information without knowing it was faulty, or like there was some miscalculation. Like, I'm really good at figuring out time travel, but like wind patterns and I just totally disagree.
Yeah. I just like the idea that, like, one of the things about Blair Walsh, and at the time it was Jeff Locke, right? One of the things about that duo is they spent a lot of time at TCF mapping out wind patterns. So, like, the idea that you just like show up and you're like, I'm from the future, I've got the wind patterns logged out for this day, and they're just accepting that despite them being one of the only people on the planet that have actually put in the work on this one. It'd just be astounding to me.
Yeah,
but it would make for a sympathetic villain story when we finally confront each other.
Exactly. We have a like, he was legitimately wronged by me. Like, I show up, we do a montage, and all of a sudden it's like, no, your numbers make sense. This is awesome. I don't have to worry about this at all. Kyle Segal chimes in though. Plot twist: Arif must use his cornerback skills to save James. James, of course, dies.
No, but the plot twist would be that I succeed, right? Like, that's like a double plot twist. Like, first plot twist, Arif, you have to play cornerback, and everyone's like, oh God, I know where this goes. And the montage me playing cornerback plays as like a flashback scene in like gray.
Grainy as hell.
And, right, yeah. Sarah McLachlan's playing, right? And so everyone's like, oh, he's screwed. And then I get burned by like Gary Anderson or something running a route, like just something absurd. Like, wow, I can't believe you got burned by like a 40-year-old kicker. And it looks pretty bad. And then I get the game sealing pick six. Like, it's a double twist.
Okay, I can see that.
And you get to live. It don't sound so unenthusiastic, James.
Well, it's been
I don't know if it's worth it, if that's the cost.
It's been a long year. Kurt asks our final question of the episode. James and Arif, loved both of your takes on how to slowly agitate a roommate over time. I just have to share this as I was thinking about it while listening to the podcast. The
What
first
is wrong with us? Oh my god.
No,
Okay.
this is everything I thought it was. After 7 years, I just assumed we were going to we were just going to slowly like morph into a different style of podcast than football. And for a while it seemed like food, but now we're just going toward either relationship or passive aggressive behavior.
And child rearing.
And
remember.
and child rearing for Uncle Arif's kitty corner, yeah. So, loved both your takes on how to slowly agitate a roommate over time. I just have to share this as I was thinking about it while listening to your podcast. The first year of marriage, my wife would often cough due to asthma, which sounded like a sneeze. In our second year of marriage, I started to say bless you, in which she would respond, it's just a cough. Now, this may seem small, but I started doing this intentionally every time she coughed for an entire year, at least twice a day. I busted a gut early last year, 2019, in which I told her that I had been intentionally asking her and laughing to myself for over a year. She was furious and asked, why would you do something like that? I'm not a social experiment, I'm your wife. At that point, I was crying with laughter and also slightly regretted telling her as it is no more. I miss the subtle enjoyment of this daily routine. So I'd like to
pause. Let's go over how incredible the sentence "I'm not a social experiment, I'm your wife" is. I'm not a social experiment, I'm your wife.
God, I can hear every single one of my exes saying that sentence aloud. And it hurts inside.
Oh my god.
That is I've never done. Okay, no, I take that back. I did something similar with a long-term girlfriend I was living with, in that every time when she would sneeze, her body's reaction was gag afterwards. So after she would sneeze, she would make a noise like this, bleh, and it would just be every time. And so when she would do it, I would then point at her like half a second later, and then she would do it again, and she would get annoyed that I was that I was playing her like the drums, like I was playing her like a rim shot each time that she would sneeze. And whether it be a big one or a small one, and it would be worse if she had multiple ones in a row. Sneeze, 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 and it I would just sit there, and it would be like James Brown going 1 time, 2 times.
Jesus Christ.
So that relationship didn't end up working out.
Oh, why not?
I'm shocked too. But yeah, we both wanted to express just how much we appreciated that first portion of the message. After that, so I'd like to ask this question to you both. When is the tipping point in an intentional action such as this, when it loses joy? Did I stop too soon? I think about this probably too often and wonder how long I could have kept it going.
Man, that's brutal.
You could have kept this going your entire marriage. And if the marriage didn't work out, what better a reveal when you're signing your divorce papers than, by the way, every time you sneezed or every time you coughed, I did this intentionally every day. What better reveal? You would have enjoyed that, even on like a spiteful area, like in a spiteful way. It would have been brilliant.
This is the worst relationship podcast on the planet. So
I just got a message from my wife, who's in the other room, who's not who listened to me say what I had just said about the sneezing thing, and she is disgusted by my actions. I have accomplished. Oh, no kidding. I have accomplished my goal here today.
So in terms of when this would lose its joy, it depends on the kind of person you are. Probably you get at least 5 years, I think. But after that, I can see it kind of depends. After that, I can see it kind of losing its appeal. The key is the reveal is only fun at around the same time it's still fun to do it. So you're always going to have to lose something when you reveal it, right? Because if you do it for like 6 years and it's no longer fun, and then you say, by the way, this thing, I don't think it has quite the same punch as it was fun while you were doing it. So you're always going to have to lose something when you do it. I would say it seems that she was legitimately upset. So maybe don't. But
she was upset by the reveal, not necessarily.
Well, I don't know. I actually know, because she said social experiment, she was upset by the reveal, I guess. That's true. So she wasn't upset that you were intentionally misreading the coughs as sneezes. Question, not to blame the victim here, but the question is, at what point does she figure out that it doesn't matter how many times she says, I'm not sneezing, I'm coughing, before she realizes you're doing it on purpose? That's the interesting thing to me. Again, that doesn't make it her fault. It's clearly your fault. You're a terrible person. But I'm kind of curious, at what point does that get to happen where she's like, wait a minute.
It's this really is, if we can tie this back to football for just a moment, this really is the knowing when to trade Stephon Diggs moment. Because you have to read the room, you have to read the situation correctly, and possibly her Twitter feed to really figure out when you've gone too far. And I still think you could have made this a thing for years. Multiple years. We're talking, 20, 30 years worth of marriage, and having some, as long as you kept it quiet. Because the thing that kills this is if you tell a friend and then the friend tells somebody else, hey, this is a funny thing, and it slowly gets back to her without you saying it aloud. Because then she heard it from a friend, and then she takes it even worse because she thinks you're totally making fun of her, as opposed to here where I think it's just more poking fun at. It's not the same degree.
It can blow up much worse.
Yes.
That's true.
So the key to all of this is not telling a damn person about this plan of yours or what you've been doing. And yes, your marriage is now suffering as a result. You have to get something out of your marriage, and this was what you were getting out of. I suggest divorce.
James.
Is that? I thought we were doing a full-on relationship podcast now. That's what people say in relationship podcasts, right? They tell you to
divorce.
Yeah, you get divorced, you delete Facebook, you hit the gym, and hire a lawyer. That. Those are the things that the people tell you to do.
Yeah, that's the playbook.
Yeah, I'm not. I was about to say I'm not wrong here. Hold on, let me be clear. I might be wrong here, but.
I am 100% probably wrong, but
and now my wife has texted me saying that she's leaving me and starting a puppy rescue. Good. All right. Well, at least somebody's going to be happy at the end of this podcast. That is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you enjoyed it. Arif, where is all of your information on the Ngakoue trade?
So you can find my instant analysis over at The Athletic, which it's up right now. I'm also going to be doing a deep dive. I'm doing film review. I'm talking to defensive line experts about Ngakoue, and trying to get a better understanding of who he is, how he wins, and how he impacts the defense. So that'll be up in a couple of days as well. And then also Chad Graff has a story that we kind of referenced about how the Ngakoue trade went down. So that's kind of worth checking out too. Otherwise, you can just find my takes on Twitter at Arif NFL.
All right, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, this is your final chance to get into the Norse Code Fantasy League, into the lottery. So email norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, or you can send a DM to NorseCodeDN, and I can go from there. Please indicate whether or not you are a member of our Patreon subscribers. So that's going to be it for Arif. My name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the bonus episode here that we were not expecting to be doing today. But please remember to always bring your wine towel, and we'll probably be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.